All right, so everyone get ready because today we are diving headfirst into a pretty big moment. Like right now, March 4th, 2025 big. Former President Trump just addressed Congress, and, well, it's safe to say people are talking.
And what makes this even more, well, unusual is the timing of it all. It's not your typical State of the Union time frame, right? We've got the transcript from the American Presidency Project, very official. But then there's this Rumble video with a very attention-grabbing title, After Dark Twos, March 4, 2025 Presidential Address to Joint Session of Congress, plus more news. You just know there are going to be some strong opinions flying around.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Different takes are pretty much guaranteed. Okay, so we've got this unexpected address, but I was thinking to really get a sense of its impact, maybe we should take a quick look back. Presidential addresses, they've always been kind of a big deal, haven't they?
Absolutely. These aren't just speeches. These are like legacy-defining moments. They can literally shift the entire political landscape. I mean, think about it. George Washington's first inauguration, right? That set the stage for how we do peaceful transitions of power. Or FDR's For Freedom speech during World War II. Talk about galvanizing a nation. They're more than just words. They're moments that get etched into, our collective memory.
And they're crafted that way, right? To set agendas, sway public opinion, even shape how the entire world sees us.
Exactly. You actually provided some really insightful analysis on this. Presidential addresses. Purpose, strategy, and impact, presidential addresses, policy and governance frameworks, and Biden and Trump presidencies, themes and analysis. It's fascinating to see how a president can use an address to really drive home their priorities. Take, for instance, Biden's focus on unity in a whole COVID-19 response. Or contrast that with Trump's emphasis on the American dream and, well, his stance on immigration.
But wouldn't you say that kind of power comes with, well, a whole lot of risks, too? Just the media scrutiny alone is intense, not to mention how easily things can get, polarized.
Absolutely. It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
Yeah.
You have to meet expectations, get a clear message across, and do it all while navigating this incredibly complex media landscape. The pressure is immense.
Which makes this whole 2025 address from Trump even more, well, fascinating, right? It's like he's stepping back into the ring, but this time outside the usual rules of engagement.
And that brings up a really interesting question. Thinking about our current political climate, what do you think are the biggest opportunities, but also the biggest challenges for a president addressing the nation today?
That's a big one, wow. But before we dive into that, you mentioned something earlier about AI hallucinations, right? I'm curious, how does that play into all this?
It's more connected than you might think. The piece you shared, AI, hallucinations, addressing falsehoods in large language models, really gets into this phenomenon. It's basically when AI, especially those powering chatbots and some search engines, start generating incorrect information. Now imagine, just imagine, an AI misinterprets a key point from a presidential speech, maybe even fabricates a whole quote.
Oh, wow, yeah. That could spiral into misinformation faster than, a wildfire, especially with how quickly things spread online these days.
Exactly. It highlights how crucial it is to be, really critical of the information we're consuming, especially as AI plays a bigger and bigger role in how we get it. And speaking of misinterpretations and things getting taken out of context, there's this real-world example that just perfectly illustrates this. Remember that YouTube transcript you provided? Rep. Al Green escorted out of House chamber for interrupting Trump's address?
Vaguely, yeah. Wasn't that during one of Trump's earlier addresses to Congress?
Right. Congressman Al Green interrupts Trump and boom, escorted out. Now, picture an AI trying to analyze that event. Could it really grasp the context? The difference between straight-up factual reporting and Congressman Green's dissenting opinion. Could it really get it?
It really shows how easily things can be twisted around, especially when you're missing, well, that human element of understanding the nuances of a situation.
And that brings us back to Trump's 2025 address. You found this really interesting YouTube transcript. Trump discusses banning transgender women in sports, declares our country will be woke no longer.
There are definitely some statements in there that are going to spark a lot of debate, let's put it that way.
Yeah, like when he flat out declares our country will be woke no longer.
Yep.
It's loaded.
Definitely. And then he goes on to call for banning transgender women from women's sports. He even cites the Peyton McNabb case as an example.
Now, for those who don't know, Peyton McNabb was a high school volleyball player who was tragically injured during a game. Right, and Trump using this case to justify a nationwide ban on all transgender athletes is bound to get some strong reactions.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue with, huge social and political implications.
Okay, so we have the content of the address itself, but how does this all fit into the larger, story of Trump's presidency? And how does it connect to those AI misinterpretations we were talking about?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. What's really fascinating here is how Trump's address it really taps into these ongoing cultural and political, currents. The term woke itself, I mean, it's become such a flashpoint, hasn't
No,
it?
yeah, absolutely. It feels like every day there's a new debate about something being too woke or someone getting canceled because of their views. It's like everywhere you turn.
Exactly. And by declaring that our country will be woke no longer,
Mm.
Trump's really aligning himself with a whole segment of the population that feels increasingly alienated by all these cultural shifts.
Mm.
And a very calculated move, both politically and, well, strategically.
And then there's that proposed ban on transgender women in sports. That's not going to stay confined to the world of athletics, is it? I mean, that's going to have ripple effects far beyond that, don't you think?
No, absolutely. It raises all sorts of questions about fairness, inclusion, and even like the very definition of gender in sports.
Mm.
And, it brings us back to the Peyton McNabb case. While it's a tragic situation, using it to justify a blanket ban like that, well, it kind of oversimplifies a very complex issue, doesn't it?
It it does feel like we're seeing a recurring theme here, you know?
Yeah.
Taking these incredibly complex issues and just brailing them down to these sound bites. And that really brings us back to those AI concerns we were talking about.
Right, exactly. Just imagine like an AI trying to analyze Trump's statement, our country will be woke no longer, but without understanding all the cultural baggage, all the nuances that come with that term. Or trying to process, the intricacies of the transgender athlete debate based on just a single case.
It's almost like we're entering this era, this new era, where critical thinking is more important than ever before. We can't afford to just passively consume information anymore, especially with AI becoming so central to, well, how we process it all.
Right. And that brings us back to that question we touched on earlier, the one about the biggest opportunities and challenges facing a president today, right?
Yeah.
Remember, you were about to share your thoughts on that.
Oh, right. Well, I think one of the biggest opportunities is this ability to connect with a truly global audience. With social media and instant communication, a presidential address, it's not just for people here in the U.S. anymore. It can reach millions, potentially billions of people around the world.
That's true, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you've got this unprecedented platform for shaping global perceptions, which is incredible. But on the other hand, well, there's the risk of misinformation spreading even faster, even further.
Yeah, and then there's that whole echo chamber effect we were talking about earlier, where people only seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs. It's a real problem.
Precisely. A president these days, they need to be persuasive, sure, but also truthful, inspirational, yeah, but grounded in reality. They need to navigate all these different realities, these different interpretations, and somehow cut through all the noise.
Yeah.
It's a tall order.
Which brings us back to the two sources we have for Trump's 2025 address, that official transcript and then that Rumble video. The one with the title, After Dark Twos, Mar 4, 2025 Presidential Address to Joint Session of Congress, plus more news. They're probably going to offer two very different takes on the same event, wouldn't you say?
Most likely, yeah. And that's exactly why it's so important to consider multiple sources. By comparing and contrasting different viewpoints, by seeing how different outlets frame the same information, we can start to get a more nuanced understanding of what's actually going on. It's like being a detective. You got to piece together the clues to get the full picture.
But even as we do that, we have to be aware of our own biases, right? The way our own beliefs and preconceptions might color our interpretation of the information we're taking in. It's tough, but we have to try.
Absolutely. We all have our own lenses through which we see the world. That's natural. But as we delve into these two sources, let's try to approach them with a critical eye and, recognize that there's no one right way to interpret what we're seeing and hearing.
Okay, I'm with you. Let's start with the official transcript. It's like the baseline, right? That neutral word for word account of what Trump actually said.
Right, exactly. It's like we're right there in the room with him, listening to every word.
But it is just the words on the page,
Yeah.
stripped of any real emotional context. We're missing all those nonverbal cues, the audience reaction, the energy of the moment. It's all kind of lost.
And that's where that Rumble video comes in. It's very likely to capture aspects of the event that the transcript just can't convey. Things like the tone, the visuals, the way the whole message is being framed and presented, it's a different beast altogether.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see how they present it, their take on it all. But before we jump into that, you were talking about the historical significance of presidential addresses earlier. I'd love to hear more about that. It's pretty fascinating, really.
Yeah, it is. It's so crucial to remember that these addresses, they're not just isolated events. They're all part of this larger historical narrative, each one building on the ones that came before it. By studying them over time, we can really track the evolution of American political thought. We can see how different administrations have tackled the challenges of their time, and I think it gives us all a much deeper understanding of where we are today.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into how these speeches have shaped, well, the nation's entire story, but both the good and the bad, the triumphs and the missteps.
Exactly. And it underscores just how powerful these speeches can be. Whether they're inspiring or controversial, they leave a lasting mark on how we understand our past, our present, and even our future. They really do.
Okay, I'm ready to see how Trump's 2025 address fits into this bigger historical picture. Let's dive into that Rumble video and, well, let's see what we find.
All right, let's see what we can uncover. This should be interesting.
All right, so we're finally watching this Rumble video. After Dark 2's Mar 4 2025 presidential address to joint session of Congress, plus more news. And yeah, I gotta say, this is definitely not your typical news coverage.
Yeah, the platform itself,
Mhm.
it tends to attract content that leans in a certain direction. That definitely has a particular flavor.
And the comments section, oh boy, it's a lot. Very passionate folks on both sides, that's for sure.
It just goes to show how important it is to really understand the source of information. We're seeing one very specific viewpoint being amplified here, and that's something we always have to keep in mind when we're trying to evaluate information, especially these days.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we've stepped into this whole other world almost, with its own rules and its own reality. It's kind of wild.
It really does, and I think it underscores how fragmented the whole information landscape has become. It can be tough to navigate sometimes.
So how do we even begin to make sense of all of this? We've got the neutral tone of that official transcript, and then we've got this Rumble video, which is putting its own very distinct spin on the event.
I think it all comes down to taking everything we have, all the pieces, and trying to put them together. You know, we have to consider multiple perspectives, even the ones that might challenge our own views, if we want to even come close to getting the full picture. It's not easy, but it's important.
Yeah, it's like, in this case, that means acknowledging that there are many different interpretations of Trump's 2025 address floating around out there, and each one has its own biases, its own agenda.
Exactly. And it's on us as individuals to really critically evaluate those narratives and then come to our own conclusions. It's
Yeah.
not about being right or wrong necessarily, but about being informed and thoughtful.
So where does this leave us? We've explored the history of these presidential addresses, we've talked about AI and how easily it can misinterpret information, and we've seen how complex and, frankly, how messy the world of online media can be. What are the big takeaways here? Like, what do we do with all this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Now more than ever, we have to be active, discerning consumers of information. We can't just passively take things at face value anymore. We have to question our assumptions, we have to seek out different viewpoints, and I think we have to be open to respectful dialogue, even with those who hold views that are completely opposite to our own.
It's like we need to become like information detectives or something, always gathering evidence from different sources, piecing things together, and trying to uncover the truth.
Exactly. And those critical thinking skills, they're just going to become more and more important as technology continues to evolve and AI becomes even more intertwined with how we get and process information. It's only going to get more challenging, I think.
Because the truth is out there, somewhere. But it's on us to find it, to sift through all the noise and all the chaos, all that information overload, and try to make some sense of it all.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive here, I want to leave everyone with one final thought, something to chew on. As we become more and more reliant on AI, how can we make sure that these technologies are being used ethically and responsibly? How do we prevent those AI hallucinations from distorting our understanding of the world and, well, eroding our trust in reliable sources? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question. And it's something we're going to keep exploring in future deep dives for sure. Thanks for joining us, everyone.